Hey y'all, it's 4 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock so the folks could start finding their seats. We would love to get started. Thank you so much for your time. Maybe tell your friends that this keynote will begin shortly. Thanks so much.
No, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. We're gonna wait till like 4:05. Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Um, we're really excited to introduce our next community keynote panel entitled "The Community Built a Model Using Participatory AI to Analyze Chicago Police Data." Um, the keynote speakers are going to be speaking about Beneath the Surface, which is a project that uses narrative justice and data science to interrogate the intersection between gender-based violence and police conduct. And joining us, we have Trina Reynolds-Tyler from the Invisible Institute and Tarak Shah from the Human Rights Data Analysis. I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to you all and let you all tell us what you're here to tell us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here with us today. We're just going to start with a short documentary that was done by PBS Independent Lens. It just came out recently. A filmmaker followed me and Beneath the Surface, and it'll just give a little bit of context before we jump into the presentation. Do you want to? Awesome. It is alleged that a male white officer struck the victim on the side of the body several times. The reporting party also alleged the accused grabbed her and her daughter's arm and pushed them out of the office. The reporting party alleged called her a bitch and a slut. It is alleged finding is unfounded. Conclusion not sustained, unfounded, founded, unfounded. There's something I despise this. There are whole families who have literally been fractured because of policing. There might be some shame associated with what happened. You might even internalize that and believe it's your fault. That feeling of isolation is very dangerous. Beneath the Surface is a project that utilizes narrative justice and data science to investigate gender-based violence at the hands of the Chicago Police Department. We interrogate these patterns as a means of opening up the space for other folks to come forward. My career aspiration is to be a hood data scientist, TBH. I should have said that's for real. I'm like, how do we use our data to handle our business, to understand Thank you so much. So in the 90s, Chicago Public Housing was named as one of the most concentrated site of poverty in the nation, and it was heavily policed between the Chicago Housing Authority Police and the Chicago Police Department. I would argue that it was, at the time, the most policed area in the city of Chicago. Now, in the early 2000s, the plan for transformation was introduced, right? Mayor Daley was like, we have to do something about this crisis that is occurring in the city of Chicago. Offered up this plan for, public housing to be demolished and then for new mixed income housing to be created. Now, up until to this day, right, 2023, the housing which should have been created for folks has yet to be created. And so lots of folks were displaced. And those displaced people were already encountering lots of violence within the public housing area that they already occupied. And not only were they facing intracommunal violence, but they were also facing violence at the hands of the Chicago Police Department. There was a group of officers known as the Skull Cap Crew who, the community gave them their nickname, Skull Cap Crew, based off of what they would wear and how they would show up. I think this quote here says, like, they not coming to play. They had been named in over, or at least 20 federal lawsuits, but not much discipline had occurred related to the folks' allegations about them. And so one day, they encountered Diane Bond. I mentioned her story in that PBS Independent Lens. Diane Bond was leaving her home, and she encountered this group of officers, and they had this guy handcuffs. They pulled a gun. They said, "Where do you live?" They went into her home, and when they went in there, they brought this guy handcuffed with him, and her son and his friend were in the back playing video games. One of them took her to the bathroom and searched her underwear for drugs, or they essentially sexually violated her. And now what Diane Bond did was she filed a complaint. Maybe a few weeks later, they came back, forced themselves into her bedroom and told her, trigger warning here because we will be talking about gender-based violence, but they forced her to bend over on her bed and reach into herself to look for drugs, another form of a sexual violation, using the war on drugs as an excuse. Now, of course, later Diane Bond, she filed a lawsuit, but the experiences of Black folks naming the harms done to them by the Chicago Police Department goes back much further than the early 2000s, but well into, early 1970s when they first introduced this concept of police accountability, to Chicago, right? This is an excerpt from the Blue Ribbon panel that says something like, it's gonna be hard for you to go into any ghetto and encounter a Black person who has not either themselves experienced police misconduct or know someone who experienced police misconduct as well. Now, Diane Bond, again, right, she filed a complaint, and then she also later received a settlement because she got in touch with a lawyer, Craig Futterman, who took on her case. And as recent as September of 2022, the Office of the Inspector General in Chicago had made a commentary on the ways that not only the amount of money that Chicago taxpayers are paying for police misconduct, but also describe the frustrations that they had with even the data collection connected to, our city's law department so that they could, see the kinds of instances where lawsuits were being filed in order to address, what appears to be, causing this to occur over and over again. They, between January of 2017 and the end of 2020, paid out over $250 million, and that's not even the money that's included in in the police budget. That's money that comes out of, that's a separate budget line item that is occurring pretty regularly. But, we're not here to talk about settlements, even though that is another form of another system of police accountability that exists. I think really it's like lawsuits which, ultimately end in settlements, or, filing a complaint and seeking some type of discipline for said officer. But today we're gonna be talking about complaints. Now, in Diane Bond's case, our founder of the Invisible Institute, Jamie Calvin, he intervened and he essentially made a public records request lawsuit. And he said, actually, Chicago police misconduct records are in the public interest. This information must be public. And after a long battle with the Fraternal Order of Police, we gained access to the metadata related to police misconduct. We created this database called the Citizens Police Data Project. And what started with, I believe, data from our V1 was like data from 2011 to 2015 is now, data that goes back to 1988. We were able to receive, I think on CDs, I remember I was in the office when we received all this data, top level information about the complaints that have gone through the Office of Professional Standards, which existed up until from the 1970s to 2007. Complaints from the Independent Police Review Authority, which also faced a scandal and ended in 2017. And now the COPA, which is still present. And so we have some of COPA's data on there too. When we got this first, dump of data, we saw that the complaints that were happening the most were related to operation and personnel violations. But many people didn't pay much attention to that part. I think a lot of times in the media, we're thinking about use of force, we're thinking about illegal searches. That's what folks focus on, but something that came out of many side conversations at the Invisible Institute was this issue with primary categorization. So when I'm talking about metadata, I'm saying like all these testimonies, it just goes flattened. And so even if in your encounter you're having like multiple types of allegations where some harm was done to you, they're gonna choose one, and that one category is going to represent your experience as it is reflected in the data. We knew that we needed narratives in order to dive deeper into the actual context where police violence was occurring. And so a special shout out to Charles Green, a man who went to jail at the age of 16 for a murder that he didn't commit. He filed a FOIA request for all of the underlying documents for complaints, right? And so opening the door for an opportunity to dive deeper into this narratives. And because the city of Chicago blew their deadline and didn't respond to his FOIA request, they could not say, well, this is unduly burdensome. We can't fulfill your FOIA request. And so his labor, gave us access to, as the fight continues, I would say, we gained access to underlying documents for complaints between the year 2011 and 2015. And so now we can kind of talk a little bit more deeply about this complaint that you see in front of you. You see the metadata, right? Officer Christopher Griggs, it's an illegal search. Researchers, when looking at the Citizens Police Data Project, might take this and have some kind of assumption about what this illegal search, or attempt to group this illegal search with all of the illegal searches that are within the data. But when you have access to the underlying documents, you see that this was not actually an illegal search, but it was a sexual violation, right? This officer allegedly said, if you show me this, I'm gonna let you out the door. And, proceeded to arrest this person at the end of the day. So we knew that we had an interest in identifying how many sexual violations at the bare minimum existed within within the data. Here are a couple other examples that are, named as an illegal search or an improper search, but they are related to sexual violations. And so we knew this, we know this isn't an isolated event. We know that this is kind of inherently a part of the issue when we have to flatten something as complex as allegations of police misconduct into a primary category. But we needed a pathway forward, right? And so we created Beneath the Surface in order to, dive deeper than this idea of a primary category and into the context where police violence was occurring. And so before I hand it off to Tarak, I want to name like the place we were in, at the very beginning of this project was, we were accustomed to. We had access to police data. We had use of force data, which is self-reported. Officers are supposed to report whenever they use force on someone. We believe that's underreported. We have search warrant data that's connected to the courts, right? Anytime a police officer officially, executed a search warrant, we had missing persons data. Anytime police, reportedly, had to help someone who had a loved one who was missing. We had that complaint data, including the primary categorization, and then we had a boatload of documents that we didn't really know what to do with. Well, we had an idea because we were friends with these folks, but I'll let Tarak take it away.
So it turned out that HRDAG had experience with a really similar problem, but in a different context. So in 2005, Guatemalan human rights investigators kind of accidentally stumbled upon these warehouses, which turned out to be the historic archives of the Guatemalan National Police. These are like warehouses filled with all of the kind of bureaucratic paperwork generated by the police going back over a century. They were kind of like molding and covered in rat feces. And they were, as you can see, pretty overwhelming. And of course, human rights investigators wanted to understand what these documents contained, but there were so many of them. I think they estimated that if you stacked up all these papers, they would go on for 5 miles. So one of the people who was down helping to figure out how to understand what these documents contained was my colleague, Dr. Megan Price, who's the executive director of HRDAG. And so I got to ask her a little bit about what their experience was like to see if we could learn anything. Even though the documents in their case were physical and molding, and in our case we just had a bunch of scanned PDFs, there was a lot of familiarity in the stories she was telling me. Most of all, this idea of this overwhelming volume and this huge diversity of different types of documents and not really knowing where to start. But where they did start, Dr. Price is a statistician, so they started with sampling. And the way they did that was they kind of made this 3D model of these warehouse spaces and where all the papers were, and used that to design sampling schemes to ensure random samples from throughout this space. So annotators would get these instructions like walk forward 15 feet, take a left and walk 3 feet, and then pick up the document that's 17 inches off the ground, and that's your sample. And what they did with these samples, you can see here on the right, was they annotated them. And they annotated them with a couple of different structured fields. So the type of document, whether it was kind of a letter or an arrest report or something like that, as well as basic metadata, dates, times, the who and the whom of each document. And finally, they read through the content of each document and coded for the presence or absence of a variety of different human rights violations. In our case, we, like I said, didn't have these physical documents, so we were able to sample without having to wander around a building like that. We just did the little sample function on our programming languages. But we also found something similar, which was when we sampled from these documents, there were just a huge variety of different types of pages that you would see in this collection. Some of them are more structured, some of them are typed, some of them are handwritten. You see invoices, medical records, summary pages, receipts, basically anything you can imagine in terms of administrative paperwork that gets generated. So this was super overwhelming, and a special thanks to Phil here from the Lucy Parsons Lab, who helped us figure out what to do next, which was he designed a page classifier that took thumbnail images of each of these pages from these PDFs and output a document type label and like whether it was an arrest report or whether it was a letter and so forth. And because we'd been kind of sampling and reviewing some of these documents, we had identified a subset of them that we knew contained these kind of unstructured narratives, like the ones that you saw earlier, and we're able to select for just those types of documents. So we went from something kind of like this, except times 1,000, down to like something like this, where we still have a number of different types of documents, but we know that the pages that we're selecting at this point do have some unstructured text regarding the allegations. And the reason I'm focusing on the unstructured text is, as you already heard from CPDP, we had that kind of structured information about each complaint. So we were trying to kind of enlarge that data by adding this text. And so in these cases, you can see that the text that we were looking for was in like different places on the page because there's different types of documents, but we knew every page had the text that we were looking for. The way that we were able to then go ahead and isolate the text from the rest of the content on the page, we used a method known as regular expressions. Secret about like most of the AI that's actually used in the world is it's actually just 3 regular expressions wearing a trench coat. Sorry. Before continuing, I want to make a small plea based on what you just saw and how complex that process was. And this is somewhat inspired by this zine I read that was put out last year by the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and Law for Black Lives. And basically what I want to say is that state agencies, including the police, they invest a ton, not only in surveillance equipment, but also kind of the tools and technical capacity to process and sift through the enormous amount of surveillance data that they're collecting. Those of us working for accountability, we also have kind of our own surveillance tool, which is our Freedom of Information laws. But I fear a little bit that we're starting to fall behind in terms of our ability to keep up with the amount of information that's available through that channel. Part of the reason for that is that large police departments, like most large bureaucracies, have moved most of their administrative work onto computers. And so because everything is already digital, it's much more FOIA-able than it used to be. But we're still behind in terms of the tools that we need. I'm saying that here because I feel like our community has a ton of expertise in kind of evaluating and or improving the fairness of police surveillance tools, things like pretrial risk assessments. I would love more of that expertise doing work like this for people working for accountability, and I will plug Helena Negatu's talk that we just saw earlier this afternoon, which was an excellent example of what I'm talking about. All right, so what did we do next, Trina?
Ooh, okay, so now, this idea of like, okay, beneath the surface, we're gonna go deeper into these complaint records and we're gonna get these volunteers to generate training data. We had already done a couple like trials before we even received the documents of people trying to like annotate pages, and we were able to build an annotation dictionary. And so, of course, initially we were interested in like, how do we quantify the number of sexual violations which have been reported to these investigative entities? And this is a screenshot from the annotation dictionary, right? And so because of the fact that we were using machine learning, we did not have to just investigate how many times sexual violations occur, but we were able to be more expansive. We were able to identify other types of context, other types of scenarios that we wanted to explore, better understand within police misconduct data. And our little crew that we call Code Review, here's a screenshot from us kicking it, will come together on a weekly basis in order to process all the stuff, whether it be the training data that we received, or it be us like doing the topic modeling, talking about stop words, like all of the things, we really did that work together. And so at the end of the day, right, the work that we did that year and some change has led to, currently we're investigating missing and murdered Black women and girls in Chicago. I'm an investigative journalist. I'm a data journalist. I'm a data scientist. I'm a journalist. Like, how do we make information accessible en masse to people? How do we, apply data science to what people have been saying anecdotally for a very long time. And folks have been talking about missing persons cases in Chicago for quite some time. And what we found within these complaints between 2011 and 2015 were 54 complaints where families were describing frustrating encounters they had with Chicago Police Department when attempting to report their loved one missing. Instances where folks were literally laughing at them, right? And it's quite disturbing. And then we found one complaint where an officer had delivered a missing girl, 14-year-old girl, to a human trafficking sting, right? And he, was later pulled over, questioned, as along with a woman who was in the passenger seat. He was allowed to, he was let go he was allowed to go back home. He resigned, which means he was able to retain his pension and become a police officer somewhere else. And then some other guy who wasn't even there at the time ended up going to jail for trafficking mostly girls who had run away from home. And so we know that we, by way of this work, have been able to do some investigative journalism inquiries, and I'm so, so grateful for that. Be on the lookout for the City Bureau and Invisible Institute, a collaborative effort. We've been looking at the data. It's been a very powerful experience. But we want to, bring the presentation from here's the history, and bring it more into a bit about who we are and what this looked like, what was this journey like for us? And so I'm gonna start with, how do we know each other, and what brings us to this work? What brings you to this work, Tarak?
Well, I've been working at the Human Rights Data Analysis Group since 2018. In the summer of 2019, Trina Reynolds-Tyler came to HR DAG as the human rights intern. And on, I think, your first day there, we went out for mango at the fruit stand, and you started talking to me about this investigation of gender-based violence. And we've been talking about it ever since.
Yes, it's true. It's true. Before before we did all of this and gained access to the documents, Patrick Ball would describe it as he said, you're trying to do machine learning, but with your brain, because we were identifying primary categories that may have the information in it. We were just doing whatever we could, but we didn't have the tech. So thanks for that reminder. I came to this work through community organizing work. I was with the Black Youth Project 100 on the Say Her Name campaign for Rekia Boyd, a young woman who had been murdered by an off-duty officer, Dante Servin. And during my time on that campaign, the day before the firing hearing for Dante Servin, he resigned. Again, retaining his pension, ending that investigation, and later went on to train international police in Honduras. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm interested in these systems of accountability, because we can't just do this this one individual campaign. There's so much richness here. Other people are experiencing this. How do we quantify it? And so I started at the Invisible Institute, actually as an AmeriCorps member, through Public Allies, and learned some data stuff, and went to grad school, and now I'm their data director. But I'm curious, Tarak, what is the role of vulnerability in the space that we create, that we co-create, that we facilitate together?
So it touches every aspect of the work that we've described, but I'm going to maybe focus on the code review part. And before continuing, I'm going to clarify that our code review was not so much reviewing code as it was these group live coding sessions, 2 hours every Wednesday, 1 hour every Friday. We had different tasks in the data processing pipeline, but some days we would just do exploratory work. The one rule that we had in code, well, we had several, but one of the main ones was that somebody has to share their text editor every day. And it is incredibly, I don't know how many of you have coded in front of a crowd. And these were people, because we were doing a lot of this work during the pandemic, who we had only really met on Zoom. So we needed to be able to build up enough trust with each other. There were a bunch of us who were at different skill levels, and people who were newer in their data science careers had to get comfortable with just pulling up a text editor and starting to write code in front of people who may have had many years of more experience than they did. And a really important part of how we were able to make that work was this spirit of camaraderie that we built up over time, where you would see like these group sessions where one person is typing in the text editor and another person is like on Stack Overflow looking something up and talking while we're doing it, and then another person is asking questions or something like that. But all of that came from building trust, and we wouldn't have been able to do a lot of that if we hadn't done that.
Yes, we were processing in real time, having, encouraging ourselves to ask questions and then also acknowledging each other's humanities in the process. We know with a project like this, sensitive stuff is going to come up. We know that we're all from different places. We have different lived experiences, and we had a lot to learn. And so we wanted to stay open, and we didn't want to freeze people in time. A part of the learning process is that you have to learn. And so I'm deeply grateful for just like off rip, like it's like we are going to be vulnerable with one another because we're safe here. I'm curious now, what did the reading groups see? It's like we have all this, so much has happened now. What did they see?
Yeah, so like let's kind of review how we got here. The kind of raw inputs to this entire data system are the testimonies, that is the memories of witnesses and survivors of violence. And through this kind of data process, those memories get kind of sliced up and put into little cells in a database. And one of those little cells is the primary category. And there's, I think, like 19 possible primary categories, and you can only have one on a complaint. So that's like 5 bits of information. There's only enough room in that little box for a single point of view. And so by kind of recovering those unstructured narratives, we were able to start exploring these documents from a different point of view. You see here in our first iteration what reviewers and annotators actually saw, and they were Google Sheets. They had a little bit of information about each complaint, plus the text that we'd extracted from that earlier process. And then they had a series of columns for each of our, we call them selectors, but those themes that you saw earlier. And they would mark an X if this theme applied to a given complaint. But we've seen what it looks like to be a reader, but who were these reading groups?
Well, we had two different kind of, it's like before influx of volunteers and then after influx of volunteers. And so the first groups of reading, crew that we had were these 2 reading groups. And I don't know if it was like divine or what, but they really separated themselves into, like it was like age. It was like only some age was free on Thursdays and some age was free on Tuesdays. And so we had a group of women ages 40 and up who were coming together, who were labeling data. And then we had a group of women who were 35 and under who were coming together and label data. People who had like really never met before. And their layout was, we're gonna check in. We're going to, come as we are. How you feeling today? They're going to do they're going to review the annotation dictionary. Then they're going to do the best that they can to label said data. And once they're done labeling the data, they're going to close out with some questions. Questions that give them the opportunity to release some of the trauma that they had just read. And then opportunities for them to discuss some of the complaints that they read, which they didn't actually know how to label, which got us a really true, authentic way of understanding disagreement. I'm gonna let Tarak speak to that later. One thing I will note about the reading groups, which I feel like is super powerful, is that we used strategies from transformative justice practitioners to establish expectations of the space. I think a lot of times when we're in spaces, including this space, sometimes there are folks who are taking up a lot of space, and there are folks who are afraid to take up space at all. And so here are a couple of the things that we uplifted. One was be raggedy, right? It's okay. We're processing in real time. These are stories that we've never seen before. These stories are breaking some of our assumptions about the world, and that's a powerful thing. Let's do this together. 2, don't yuck my yum. Some of the stuff that I like, you might not like, and that's okay, because it's not about us projecting and placing whatever value systems that we have onto one another. It's about acknowledging and respecting one another. Step up, step back, meaning like, step up and speak. You are here because we want to hear you. And also, if you realize that you are taking up lots of space in a room and your mouth is getting dry, you talking a lot, you haven't heard from one of the people in the space, make some room for them. Ask them if they would like to share something, being mindful, and then also landing the plane like I'm about to land this slide. Just like, sharing your idea and then letting it go and giving other people the opportunity to bounce off of you. Just because you talk once doesn't mean it won't be the last time you talk. And so this is participatory. Y'all are not gonna be able to really tell us this, but I do want you to marinate on like what types of agreements or expectations you want to create in the spaces that you occupy, because I don't think that we think about this often enough, and then we find ourselves in situations where we're a little bit uncomfortable and we're not sure how to adjust. So
We've been talking about this annotation dictionary that these readers are looking at. Where did that come from?
Well, the annotation dictionary, let me see. I pressed it twice. It didn't move yet. I'm gonna try one more time. I hope it doesn't. It's frozen, so I'm gonna just keep talking while it catches up, and then I'm gonna go back on. There we go. Awesome. So actually, we've been having this conversation about gender-based violence at the hands of police for quite some time now. It's still lagging. It's gonna take some time. Andrea Ritchie and we did a public newsroom with the City Bureau where Andrea discussed her book called Invisible No More, which talks about the, I'm gonna press this button one more time. It's a lag. Again, I'm gonna keep going. If it goes back, we'll press play. Where Andrea was able to look nationally and see some of the context where gender-based violence at the hands of police have been reported, where people had come out, maybe there was some media attention, maybe there was some relationship there. So we built the annotation dictionary based off of some of her work. And then also, before we started this project, we had an event that was exclusively for Black women and non-binary folks. They were able to turn their camera off. They didn't have to even share their real name. And we just told them about the project. We were like, we're going to do this thing. And I want, one, what do you think about the project? And then what are some of the issues that you anticipate will arise by way of us doing this work? And, that's ultimately how the annotation dictionary was created. This PowerPoint slide is lagging a little bit. I'm gonna press this button one more time. Okay. So annotation dictionary means that there are a bunch of people who are generating training data, and sometimes a bunch of people who don't necessarily agree. So Tarak, how do we handle disagreement?
So as people were labeling, we tracked each annotator with a unique identifier, and in code review every week, we would import these new labels, and we would, among other things, we would do some exploratory stuff, and we would always do these calculations of agreement rates for each of the selectors. That is, for each selector, how often different readers who read the same document agreed about whether a theme was present or not. And in that process, we were, especially near the beginning, we were seeing certain selectors where agreement rates were not as high as we would have liked them. And what that allowed us to do was we started sampling some complaints where there had been disagreement and reading through them together as a group. And we were able to see a couple of things. Sometimes we were able to see areas where our training materials were maybe not complete enough or not clear enough. Other times we were able to see areas where the annotation dictionary itself was too ambiguous. And we were able to clean it up and kind of continue to refine the annotation dictionary. And all of this work, refining that dictionary and kind of cleaning up this process. We also kind of learned a lot about inter-rater reliability during this process. So we read papers together and calculated statistics, and we also had these kind of ongoing discussions about, as we continue this work, what is the best way of dealing with disagreement? And you can see up there some of the things that came up during our conversations, including kind of estimating weights and kind of assigning any records that have high disagreement to the core team at the Invisible Institute to do a secondary review, and so forth. But what was important about this was we really kind of nailed down our entire process through that early reading group phase, which was super helpful. The annotation dictionary became super refined because in August, our number of readers went from 8 to over 200.
Imagine. from 8 people to 200. Honestly, in August, we put out a call for volunteers, and, on the data science crew, there was some, there was some uncertainty with how many people would actually sign up to be volunteers with us.
So some of us had doubt because we weren't on Trina's Instagram page all the time and didn't realize that 2 days earlier she had posted a Double Dutch video which went viral, and like thousands of people were looking at her page already.
And so, that just on the piece of receiving, bringing that to scale one, I just want to acknowledge and thank, our reading groups A and B for allowing us to really fortify that annotation dictionary. But also, it was a moment where we really had to re-engage the way that we train people in the first place, right? Before it was an intimate setting where people are tagging, labeling the same complaints, and then they're having a discussion about it afterwards. Then we went to a mass Zoom training session where, we're doing this but high speed, and then also folks are in groups where they're not necessarily tagging the same narratives, but they do still have the opportunity to talk to each other, to decompress, to talk about the things that shock them. Now, a big piece of, shortly after that, we are all about sharing our findings, even the findings that didn't go into, which we didn't decide to continue our investigative journalism thread on. We shared about responses to sexual assault, responses to domestic violence, right? Some of these initial shared experiences we were able to identify within the complaints. And then we also were able to go through our volunteer feedback. So after every session, we encouraged folks to fill out a feedback survey. And a lot of times what people would tell me was I wish I could tag something. I just really wanted to tag this thing because and in the feedback survey, it said what is a topic that you wish that you could have tagged? And so this is just kind of a little collection of some of the things that the volunteers were saying they wish they had the opportunity to label data for, because folks were so excited for this opportunity to contribute. But they felt a little bit boxed in. I'm well, we have to be mindful of your brain capacity. We can't give you 20 things to annotate. We have to do groupings of it. And a special shout out to the Spantry, a small technology company based in Chicago. They used us for their MLK hackathon in 2022, and they built an application so that we could more easily provide community members, volunteers with the narrative text so that they could label data, but also so that we could swap out these the selectors or themes that we have pre-identified. Maurice Robb, he at Spantry, he's actually married to Audrey Petty, who wrote High Rise Stories, a book, a collection of narratives about folks' experiences in public housing in Chicago. It's very much worth a read. I'm curious, speaking of new tech, right? Spantry gave us this new thing. What are some of the other ways our tech has evolved?
So I want to say one thing, which is we at HRDAG learned so much from this process, and in particular, we learned so much from our colleagues at the Invisible Institute and all the folks at the Lucy Parsons Labs who played a big role in this data processing, as well as all of the volunteers who were involved in every part of this work that we've talked about. And we learned so much that this pipeline that we've described is kind of a core part of our toolkit whenever we're working with partners now. But we continue to try to learn and evolve in terms of the specific methods. So we still use page classifiers like the one Phil showed us how to use. We have started using more pre-trained classifiers that we then fine-tune, and that method was described in this paper that I read a little while back. We still use a lot of regular expressions for the field extraction and narrative extraction. We have more recently had good experiences with some of these cloud-based services for that part of the process. If anybody in this room has access to free credits for any of those services, I would really appreciate talking to you. And same thing with the language modeling. We still sometimes do the topic modeling and then classifier step, but we've also played more with deep learning models. And again, we're like always open to trying new things and seeing what works. We continue to grow and learn as we do this work. But this is all about kind of tech, and this talk is all about the humans who participated in this work. So what is it that makes this work explicitly participatory?
Okay, so participation was included in every single part of the work, from consulting with experts, from to the event that we had before people even started tagging data, so that we can anticipate issues, to the fact that the people who were labeling data were literally volunteers, which means they received the assignment and they like chose to do it, which of course is explicitly participatory, because there's no payment really involved. But then beyond payment, because we would love to pay folks, honestly, if folks are interested in donating to Beneath the Surface, please find somebody, get in tune. But one of the big pieces that I would like to say makes it participatory is that we were accountable to each other, and we were really mindful about being inclusive at every step along the way, from the data workers to the folks doing the modeling. It was like everyone was building their data literacy skills, right? From the elders in the reading groups who were like, what's a binary and like why? All the way to folks in coder view being like, okay, so we did this in R, but how do we do it in Python? I think it was like just such a beautiful opportunity for us to be inclusive of again, all of our lived experiences and our shared desire to just learn a little bit about learn a little bit through the process. Typically, it took us 3 months, right? I think in all to like build this classifier, and I think a lot of folks in this room have some, connection to like buying some training data set for $9.99. I don't know how much it costs, but fitting a classifier in an afternoon. And so, Tarak, I'm curious, why did we take so long to do this?
So in order to answer that question, I want to tell you all this story about a group of data scientists I met from a place called Data Civica. That's a feminist collective who uses data and tech to defend human rights. They're based in Mexico City. And one of the projects they've been working on recently is this project to locate likely locations of hidden or clandestine graves. So Mexico currently is experiencing this crisis of enforced disappearances. There's hundreds of thousands of disappeared people in Mexico right now. And over the years, they've discovered thousands of hidden graves that contain the remains of disappeared people. So a thing that happens is the families of the disappeared organize these brigades to go out and search for graves in the hopes of finding the remains of their loved ones and getting some closure that way. But the surface area of Mexico is enormous, and so what the folks at Data Civica are doing is they've been working with these families and getting information from them about places that they've already searched before and whether they found graves there or not, and then using kind of satellite and geospatial features to try to like narrow down kind of the available search spaces to the places where it's most likely that you would find graves based on these different features. So far, their work, they've only really deployed it in 2 regions in Mexico, that's Baja California and Michoacan. And they were interested in kind of scaling it up to other parts of Mexico, but they were talking about how long that's going to take and how much work it's going to take. So I knew that like police in Mexico also do these searches for hidden graves, and I wondered if they would ever consider kind of like working with the authorities and letting them see their models in return for like getting access to their data so they could scale up their models to this larger area. And the thing they told me, shout out to Alicia, Montserrat, and Monica at Data Civica, was that the whole point of this work was that they were doing it with and for the families of the disappeared. Many of those families already have distrustful relationships with the authorities because of their previous experiences. so they could kind of risk the relationships that they've built with these families in order to scale up their models and have them work in every city. But then, like, who's the work for? Like, what is the point of doing it at all? And so, in a similar way, in our project, the goal wasn't just to build a model. It was for us as data scientists at different levels to build up our skill sets collectively. We would huddle around our little shared Zoom screen every week, and we would like argue about stuff or ask questions and say, why do you do it this way, or why don't you do it that way? And a lot of times I would like start answering as though I knew, and then I was like, actually, I've just always done it that way. Let's try it this other way and see what happens. And there was a lot of that, and we had like several goals. Like we just really wanted to get there together authentically. And we wanted also to use this data science that we all just enjoyed doing as a way to expand our own conversations and understanding of both gender-based violence and state violence. And so that's why we took our time with it. But these topics that we wanted to kind of understand are really heavy. Trina, you're always talking about the weight of this work. What do you mean by that?
So for us, you know, this project, this process has been really eye-opening, you know, about the experiences of folks that extend beyond, right, some of the media headlines that we see. We're like, oh, you know, black man, like, shot dead in the street, you know what I mean? But we're not necessarily thinking about the ways that, again, folks are experiencing intracommunal violence, are calling police during some of the most traumatic experiences that they've ever had, and then being faced with, another harm, and then, you know, they had to go and file a complaint about said harm, a type of harm that you might actually want to just pretend like never happened to you and just push off in this life. And I think a lot of us in this room are familiar with the feeling of just wanting to pretend like something didn't happen instead of reporting it to folks. And I think like keeping that in mind, keeping in mind that the real the heaviness of human rights violations in the year 2023 in this city and in the cities that you come from, I want you to think a lot about, you know, your responsibility as folks who are in the realm of artificial intelligence, who understand the ways that we can use technology to ask questions about the world. Something that Serena said at the Black Feminist Algorithmic Assessment was letting liberation lead and technology follow. I forget who said that quote, Serena, if you, feel free to shout it out if you haven't off the top of your head. I see you. But, you know, something that I want to really say today before we open it up for question and answer, I know we don't have much time for Q&A, but is that we have the responsibility collectively as everyone in this room, as we wield technology, we are quite literally building the future, and we have to determine what are the things that we are building and how will they play a role in the future that is unfolding in front of us right now in this moment. And so I encourage you, you know, to hold the weight with us, right? Participate in issue areas like this, you know, build relationships with people who are most impacted by what you're studying. Build relationships with the data subjects. You might find contexts that you could not imagine that go much deeper than the data frames that are chilling in your global environments. So thank you so much. I think that's us. Awesome.
So with the town hall, we have time for like one question. We have time for like one question. If we have, I don't want to put pressure on anybody, but that means it has to be really great and really brief. Okay, come on.
Yeah, thanks so much. Maybe it's a present for you. What's the best way we can support this work?
Unrestricted funding.
Yeah, yes.
Do you want to dig into that a little bit more?
Yes, Yes. So on the unrestricted funding piece, right? So something that came up for us quite a lot was that, we have now we had lots of people, and then there were folks who were volunteers who had special gifts and talents where they were like, I want to do this particular thing, and we're like, well, that's a lot for you to do without being paid. You know what I mean? Like we wanted to be mindful of the weight that we put on others, and so having access to funding so that we can hire, some data science support, so that we can hire support for our volunteer reading groups would be incredible. And then also putting our brains together, thinking about building a network amongst each other so that we can ask questions around human rights violations and build more models like, Judy is, as we call our classifier, is just one classifier of so many that we see in the future playing a role in revealing the human experience so that we can have conversations about solutions and policy change.
Thank you.
Is there a donation link? If you go to invisible.institute, you can click on the support and you will see the donation link. Yep. Make sure you somewhere in there say beneath the surface. Because I almost, I'm joking, but.
So, is it okay if folks were to talk to you all in the lobby if they have any additional questions as we move on to the next session?
Absolutely, we are prepared to have many talks with folks outside. We'll be here for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We will be, you all will be doing the FACT town hall in about 5 minutes. We do encourage you to stay or come back for the town hall, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes.
Can we get the town hall slides? Oh, did we talk?
It is cold. I asked them. They said they asked someone to turn up the.
I know. I've asked.
And they were like, they were like, we think it got like 5 degrees colder after we said.
I mean, I know there are a lot of people here, like bodies breathing, but they really. It must be like 60.
It's yeah, man. I think it's a Chicago thing because every day I go back to my hotel, they've turned the air. It's like down to like 65, and I leave on like 70.
Yeah. All right.
It's so cold. He was in the hallway.
All right, folks. We'll start in about a minute with the town hall. All right, we're gonna get started now.
Did he give you permission to just shush? Oh,
Okay,
wow.
great. So we'll get started with the town hall. So first we'll just kind of go over a few things that are new this year. So we've obviously returned to a largely in-person event with hybrid components, particularly for tutorials, paper sessions, and obviously the keynotes as well. But some craft sessions were also hybrid and had different kinds of formats like that. But the emphasis was really what we heard from the steering committee, especially, was that we wanted to go kind of back to primarily an in-person event for networking purposes and making connections. And then we obviously also used the kind of online platform that was previously used called Hopin. We also had an expanded keynote program, so we had 6 keynotes, including panels and conversations, and 2 community keynotes, one of which you heard just now that was fantastic, and I don't think any of us could have asked for a better closing keynote. And we also had a pre-conference keynote last Friday that's actually online now if you want to see that, if you missed that. We also gave more best papers to recognize the breadth of scholarship represented at FAccT'. And then finally, we had a new advocacy research chair role that was meant to kind of extend connections to the advocacy community, and they really kind of led the effort around community keynotes and kind of reaching out in that space. So you might be wondering, and I hope you've been thinking about this, how did this all happen? How did this come together? It was the effort of a lot of people, something like 30 or 40 people in total, and thousands of hours. I want to underline, bold, italicize. This was so much work to put on. In particular, there are 3 people who we want to spotlight in particular. Wells is hiding his face right now, but yeah. So we definitely had some most valuable players here at FAccT'23. So Meg Young, who was the craft, and then also stepped in as a publicity chair in the final hour, and really kind of helped boost recognition of the things that were happening for the program, and really was just essential to almost every aspect of FAccT'23. Michael Medeo made anything possible, like anything and everything possible, streaming online, recording, making sure that the slides were uploaded and prepared, videos, etc. It's like endless hours, and we couldn't thank him enough. And then Wells also oversaw the SV process, and there were that many. There were like I think 50 to 70 SVs. It was an incredible amount of support, and we just want to kind of honor that. And so maybe we could just give a round of applause right now. Yep.
I'll go over the registration numbers. In total this year, we have 822 registrations, and this is lower than last year, which we will go over. The difference between in-person and virtual. In person, we actually we're seeing an 18% increase compared to last year, but most of the job comes from the virtual, and that's consistent with this year's emphasis in having this in-person section. And breaking down between student and another feedback from last year's town hall. Another piece of this is in the end we ask for feedback, and we indeed took into consideration from last year's feedback. One feedback last year was that the majority of the attendees in the in-person section were students, and this year they are roughly even between students and other non-students in other conference. And this is the breakdown between different geographic countries. I think this is a field in the form called the country that you work in. We have 37 countries represented, and on the left we are showing the numbers from the top 10 countries. And yes, in terms of scholarships and financial support, we have 63 funded candidates for a total of about $70,000 of funding, and 62% of these are students, and 60% of these attendees were attending FACT for the first time. In fact, this is actually my own first time at FACT. 51% self-identified as a member of underrepresented communities, 13% of all these were student volunteers, and 25% were associated with craft and tutorial. And the one thing that, in case you didn't notice, I think we very intentionally following the tradition that we mixed craft and tutorial with paper sessions. So every day we have some tutorials and crafts throughout the conference. And I think Aziz is going to take over and go over the budget.
So I have the really fun job of talking to you about the budget. Actually, it is fun because it's like the moment where the curtain is ripped away and you get to see how the sausage is made, the sausage being the conference. And you get to hear a little bit about what the process was and what it means to put an event on in a very, very material way. So thanks to our terrific sponsorship chairs, Seth, Lazar, and Hima, we have a record, and this is going to be put in context in a second. We have a record amount from of sponsorship, which, as you will see, is necessary for this event to happen. And we're going to break down the budget, and you'll see why in a second. But we just flagged that one of the terrific things that Seth and Hima did was to move us away from the ratios of corporate to foundation scholarship sponsorship that we had in the past to a place where we're less reliant upon many of the entities that that many of us are extremely critical of, and more dependent on foundations, which is not without its problems, but a better place to be in. To get into the budget, let me give you a little glimpse of the process of how we built the conference from the ground up. And a little peek into that is this chart, which shows you over time how registrations accreted. And the thing to pay attention to is the little plateau, or the almost plateau, around the beginning of May. At the beginning of May, we received an email from ACM saying, we don't think you're going to hit your registration numbers, and we're not going to keep paying for the venue and the AV that you need. And so we were in a position of having to navigate the strictures of AV, moving aggressively on advancing and deepening our publicity efforts, which is something that Meg Young and Kit Rodolfo, who's not here, but who's based at Stanford, previously at Carnegie Mellon, did amazing work stepping into and expanding our publicity team at the last minute, while at the same time trying to keep our budget within as tight a constraint as we could in a way that would persuade ACM to let us move forward with necessary elements of the conference, right? So that's just to give you a sense of sort of the context and the varying forces that we were navigating through in order to make this happen. And at the end of the day, we, I think we've landed the conference in a very healthy place financially, in a way that makes the event stable and likely to obtain strong and hopefully better ACM support in the future. So I'm not going to run through all of these numbers, but just to give you a sense, over on the left-hand side is our income stream, right? And you'll see how slightly more than 2/3 of the money necessary for FAccT to happen comes from sponsorship, right? The registration fees you pay are incredibly important, but they only make up 1/3 of what's necessary to make this event happen, right? And take a look just at the bottom line numbers, the 618 number on one side, that's how much money is coming in, and the 595, 949 number. That's an estimate, right? But we're pretty confident that we're reasonably close to that number. Those numbers are pretty close to each other, right? And getting to the place where we are spending what we have, when we don't know how much money will come in via registration, when we don't know how much money will come in with sponsorship, that is the core challenge in a FAccT, right? Here's one piece of evidence that this conference is going to be sustainable in the near term. Last year, the per conferee cost of the conference was $720 US dollars. This year, please forget that inflation exists. This year, it's 719. So we have a pretty stable financial structure which we can point to for ACM and say, look, we've got a robust and coherent way of doing this, and we can predict with a little bit more confidence than we could in the past what it means to put this together, right? And bear that in mind in terms of all of your experience over the last couple of days and what you paid in registration. What it costs for each person, if you just paid in cash to have this conference, what you would be paying every year is about $720.
All right, it's me. I'm going to give a review of our programs and just to quickly go over, and I won't read all the slides in the interest of time. But our conference started with Dr. Colloquium. We had 88 applicants from a diverse set of students on a diverse set of topics, and in the end, this process actually was quite competitive, and we only can accommodate 33 applicants in the actual program. And tutorials, we got 42 submissions, and 14 acceptances, and again, I guess in the end, it was also a competitive process to get tutorials presented at this conference. And we are lucky to have a diverse range of tutorials covering various topics, which you have seen in the conference. A unique thing about FAccT is that we have Craft and Meg, again, did a great job in soliciting a wide range of Craft sessions, submissions, and we were able to accept 24 submissions. And here we would like to emphasize, like, we actually were able to get people closest to real-world impact at this conference, including artists, activists, data workers, investigative reporters, litigators, humanitarian workers, and formerly incarcerated people, and labor organizers. Again, you can take a look at the slide. Yeah, let's give a round of applause to Mac. And as Sarah said earlier, we had a community keynote. We moved away from the model from last year where everyone was producing video to this year we had a pre-keynote at the beginning and the session that you just saw. That was very powerful. And I think is indeed kind of working. Later, I think we are going to announce some award related to this notion and think about how we can push more advocacy research with this community's effort. I think this is kind of, again, the DEI initiative effort. We provided, that was one of the care grants that we dropped during the budget crisis. We didn't have a call for caregiver or bandwidth grant, but we still accommodated all the requests that we ended up getting. And we were able to give out 73K to 55 people as travel grants. I think Christina is going to go over the proceedings.
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to also share this year was kind of the growth, or actually a little bit of a decline this year in the number of papers submitted, largely because we had such a huge increase in 2022 in the number of papers submitted, so we might actually just be coming back to slightly what's more manageable actually when we think about reviewing. But we were able to accept 154 submissions, keeping around the same acceptance rate of about 25%. When we look at the different areas of which we saw a lot of our papers, we see that FAccT is still largely technical in terms of a majority of the submissions were in data and algorithm evaluation, algorithm development, and human factors. We are seeing more submissions in some of the humanities, the law and the policy areas, but still largely very technical with kind of the acceptance rates kind of distributed across those. We're going to go through the general chair's reflections. I don't know who's doing the first.
Yeah, the first one is on the timing of the leadership and knowledge transfers. I think without going into this too much, maybe EC will cover it a little bit. The planning of this year started quite late. I think ideally the planning should start shortly after this previous iteration concludes. And I guess the ECs, at the same time, they are working very hard in identifying the organizers for the next conference. And there are various institutional knowledge gaps from year to year that will be necessary to address in planning for future conferences. And I guess this is something that we, as organizers, will try to reflect better. But as one example, for instance, the proceedings, if you pay very close attention, it was only available sometime on Monday morning. Largely because there was a lot of knowledge that we didn't have and we missed various deadlines, or we didn't push the authors hard enough in getting the final version ready. And we are currently exploring different options so that we can better document the processes, and so hopefully next year it will run more smoothly. And I think
Yeah, so the second point in our reflection is just thinking about this nature of holding a hybrid conference. I know Aziz kind of pulled the curtain back a little bit in terms of the budget, but to pull the curtain back a little bit further, to just talk about the immense work that it takes and that went into doing a hybrid conference, the immense amount of labor. One of the reasons that we showed a lot of the MVPs is just dealing with Hopin, dealing with trying to have mixed modality sessions within like one craft or one tutorial. It did take an immense amount of labor. And we think they went really, really well. But one of the things that we are kind of pondering on this year is that sustainable. In just a couple of slides, I'll be showing the survey that we have for this conference, and we'll all be taking a minute to take out our phones and to start doing that survey, because we would really love to hear your feedback, especially as participants and viewers, of how that experience went. But for next year's general chairs and those who are volunteering, I think we really need to explore how we can do, if hybrid or mixed modality conferences are going to continue to be a thing, how we can do them a little bit more efficiently, and so that the work is dispersed and not as laborious. So.
I think that the next point flows from the previous two, that putting on FAccT' is like putting on 3 conferences simultaneously. And it's done by those 30 or 40 people who we showed on the first slide or the second slide. And many of those people are untenured academics or work at non-academic institutions that don't recognize the importance of the labor that goes into FAccT'. And moreover, the workflow of the conference is such that there are periods of time in which, for certain committees, for certain actors, for certain volunteers, essentially FAccT' becomes a full-time job. And there's no way that a person who's in a particular role has of requiring or enforcing or eliciting assistance when perhaps one of their cohort on that panel doesn't doesn't step up to the plate in the way that they have. What that means is that there are many moments in time over the course of the emergence of the FAccT' conference at which there are immense strains placed upon one or other of the various committees, and often that means a great deal of stress on one particular person. And that's deeply unfair. And one thing that we need as an organization to think about is how to elicit or how to address that intensity of labor demand that is often falling upon a single person. I'll give just one example of that, although it's not an example, it's by no stretch the only example. Managing the flow of data from the sessions into Hopin and Zoom and onto Hopin again is an enormous task. It is a bone-crunching task, and there's just not that many people who are here to do it. So we need to think harder about what we are asking, what the wonderful things that this conference provides demand of some of the volunteers down the scale, or members of the various committees down the scale, as a matter of practice, in terms of, and think about whether there are better ways in which we can elicit responsibility, better ways of sharing those burdens, and maybe in some instances, looking to actually simply hire somebody to do certain kinds of labor, because it's just not, there are real, I think, fairness concerns when that labor falls upon particular people at some level of the organizational hierarchy. And I think this actually leads very nicely into what Sarah's going to say.
Right, so I think speaking of degrees of support and what we might want to seek, we started pondering as a group, what kind of support could we ask for / require of our relationship with the ACM? And might we want to join up with perhaps a special interest group who has kind of longer institutional knowledge, ways of relating to the association, and developing relationships and alignments such that we can kind of learn from how they've managed and organized labor in particular. And I do want to emphasize like one point I think that you made, Aziz, around, I think we have an understanding of how the budget works to some degree, but I do think that some of the work that is kind of volunteered at this point should not be. So maybe we can just end on that, that note. And I think we'll now turn over to the EC. Or actually, we have a happier note. I don't know why I ended on that one, but because you might have noticed in the budget that there was a bit extra in the end because there were a lot of later registrations. We did actually have an overage, and so with that overage, we will be establishing awards for small projects that are aimed at enhancing FAccT's connections with advocacy and community engagement. So really working in the spirit of craft and the community keynotes. So we'll be formalizing an announcement on that, and so you can look out for more details on the website and via social media, and we'll probably kind of send an email out to conference attendees as well, so that you can submit to that. And then finally here also is the survey. Christina, do you want to talk more on that?
Yeah, so I don't know if after the ECs, if we're opening up for the floor, but one of the best ways that we can get you all's feedback and input and just, an understanding of your overall experience, what you all want to see, what you loved, is to take the survey. There is a QR code on the screen at this moment. If you have your mobile phone, you can scan and go ahead and start taking that. There's also a link underneath if you want to type that in, but we will be making it available. It's going to be on the website as well. The survey will be on the website. We're also going to put it on the Twitter page for FAccT. If you could please take the survey. I know probably sound like the annoying State Farm person that's calling your phone, but it really helps us out to get feedback from you all and to have you rate everything from the tutorials and the keynotes to the venue, to the flow of the sessions, the lengths of the sessions, the breadth of the topic areas, what you might want to see more of. Really important to this year or for next year is the potential modality. I know for those of you who submitted papers, we had briefly toyed around with the idea of having poster sessions. That might help the flow of things and the traffic and also the engagement, especially for junior scholars. So there are a couple of questions in the survey that do ask about if we were to introduce poster sessions, how you all would like to see that done. So yeah, if you all could take that, and then we'll turn it over to the ECs.
All right, hi, I'm Seth Lazar. I'm one of the members of the executive committee, and we've got Maria Diaz-Tiago and Gonzalez coming up, and Michael Ekstrand. Look, first of all, being a general chair of a conference like this is an enormous job, and it's a huge gift to the community. And I'd just like to start by thanking Aziz, Sarah, Christina, and Chen Hao for a wonderful conference. Thank you so much. So, like, what is it that makes a good FACT conference? Like, what are our core values? What does it mean for us to be inclusive? It means making it possible for everyone to participate without feeling compromised or disrespected. One of our values is being a big tent. What does that mean? It means that we do research grounded in real socio-technical systems, not hypothetical ones, and we focus on understanding and mitigating risks. But beyond that, we're also open and we evolve. We are trying to achieve a kind of agonistic dissensus. This is something that came up last year. So Chantal Mouffe and Meg, in one of the papers from last year's conference, we want to be able to bring together kind of adversarial views without devolving into hostility, with some prospect of making progress. And we want to connect communities of practice with researchers, with the AI companies that are advancing these technologies. Just like in the session with the M-Turkers reaching out to Amazon, who had people in the audience, just like just now with Tarak and Trina, who are going to be connected with the AI companies to get credits for to do the data analysis, to hold the Chicago PD to account. This is all exactly what FACT is about, and it was a wonderful conference, just precisely in line with our core values. And what I love about this conference and this community is that we try to model the values in our behavior that we discuss in our work. We care about how socio-technical systems shift power. So within FACT, we strive to allocate power legitimately. We have like an organizational structure, you might not know, but we do, and we have a kind of constitution, a set of strategic goals. We ask for your voice, things like this, and then throughout the year, and we try to enact it. So if you remember last year, those of you who were in Seoul, we were talking at the town hall about how we thought maybe it would be too much to keep doing in person. Maybe we'd have to go like alternate virtual to in person. And everyone was like, no, we really want to do this again. And like we took that and we had a meeting. For me, it was 2 in the morning. And we had a long discussion. And we heard you. And that's why we're here. One of the things that we've really found over the last year, though, is that sometimes it's hard to hear you as our kind of channels of communication kind of collapse around us. And we don't want to be dependent on transphobic and racist digital platforms for our communication. So how can we communicate better? Right? So one thing that we're going to trial is we're going to trial sort of community calls, which will be an opportunity to speak to the community every 2 or 3 months, where you can actually talk to one another on Zoom. We also ask you to join our Slack as a way of talking with one another. The QR code is up there. Hopefully that will work. I set it up, so I'm not sure, like probably. And like, we want you to give us your ideas for how we can build a better FACT public sphere. Like, we don't want to have to rely on Twitter. We're on there while we have to be. But there are definitely better ways for us to communicate. So think about how we can do that. Make sure that we stay in touch with one another throughout the year, and we talk to one another throughout the year, not just yearly. Okay, we're going to switch over to Michael, who's going to tell you what the executive committee has been up to over the last year.
So the executive committee is responsible. It's a subset of the steering committee that's responsible for a lot of the year-over-year things, like identifying candidate general chairs, working with the general chairs on aligning the conference organization with the ongoing multi-year strategic direction of the conference, et cetera. So we do a lot of things. A big chunk of what we've needed to be doing over the last year since we last talked with you was working on recruiting conference organizers, working with this year's organizers on this conference and talking with them when they needed our input. We've also been working on some things around continuity and knowledge transfer, documentation as we work on handing off to future EC members, some adjustments to bylaws to make terms of service better supportive of that, and as well as working on expanding the steering committee and some other policy updates. So I'm going to talk about a few of those things in slightly more detail. So this last year, I forgot to count. We've welcomed several new members to the steering committee, and this is not including this year's general chairs who are also added. Welcome. And one of our big focuses this year on the steering committee recruitment and expansion was to improve or at least maintain the diversity and kind of many of the dimensions we think about in the steering committee, but also attend to increasing representation in conference leadership from civil society. And so several of these new steering committee members have primary affiliations with some kind of civil society organization. There's been an ongoing process for working on the sponsorship policy. So a small task force, Solon Barocas and Maria Hildebrandt, have been working on a very extensive, like 20-page document of recommendations grounded in a lot of the discussion and papers that have been published at FAccT, writing that's been published elsewhere about the function and the risks of sponsorship and how that functions in the conference environment, and making a number of recommendations for sponsorship policy and for conference policy that advances the financial needs of the conference while also providing protections against inappropriate influence of the conference. They have presented that to the steering committee. They are currently revising that document and recommendations. A few of the highlights is recommending to do some small revisions, but largely keep our policy for subjecting sponsors to an approval process. Identifying that a number of our existing policies, particularly around how reviewing is structured and how sponsorship does not come with any input on the program, are providing good protections against some of the potential problems, and then also some recommendations around conflict of interest and governance. Next steps on that you can expect. They are working, like I said, they're currently working on finishing revisions on this document in response to the steering committee feedback. That document will then be circulated to the steering committee, and it will be also shared publicly so you can see the recommendations that they have made. And then the executive committee will be working through those recommendations to work on how to translate them into actual policy changes as appropriate. So that's what you can expect next. There's also a task force of the steering committee that is looking at how FAccT handles peer review with an eye towards improving our peer review process, and you can expect this to continue over the next year. And so with that, I'll hand it off to Maria to talk about what's coming next.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to share with you now, as we've been experiencing and planning 2023, we're obviously looking forward to 2024 as well. And I am so excited to share with you that in 2024, we're aiming for FAccT to be in Latin America. And I know that we spent a lot of time right now telling you how much work goes into planning FAccT and how much the organizer roles are, and that is true, but it is also such a rewarding position, I promise you, from my own experience at least. And so I really encourage you. This is a community that we built together. This is a conference that we've created together, and so if you care about this community, if you also want to be a part of shaping it, I really encourage you to reach out to us and let us know that you would want to take on an organizing role. The form that is there, the QR code, will take you to a form where you can share that, and you can also reach out to any of us and tell us about it. We really want you to be a part of creating FAccT. And the statement of AI harms and research-based policy that we published earlier this week, which you can find on the website, is still up for signing if any one of you want to sign the statement, so you can find it on the FAccT website. And finally, I want to wrap up thanking the members of the EC that are going to wrap up their term in the coming year. So being in the EC is a 3-year commitment. And right now, Chato, Alex, and Michael are going to wrap up their term in the coming month/year. And so I want to take a moment to thank them. And with that, I'll open the floor to hear any questions that you may have for the GCs or for the ECs, any comments, anything that you want to share with us. And you can come to any of the mics.
If we have a second, If you were a session chair or if you were on one of the various committees, we have a t-shirt for you. It literally says, I went to FAccT and all I got was this crappy t-shirt.
While we're waiting for other people to come up, I'll just say one comment that's on Hopin from Aaron, which is, I love the hybrid setup. It may be a good idea to hold virtual and in-person separately next time if logistics allow it. Most conferences are starting to follow that model now.
We have some experience of trying that. Yeah, that literally does double the conference. It's certainly worth exploring whether there are ways of doing that. But that's what we did last year. We had a sort of, there were 4 down hours a day, and there was a program of online and then a program of in-person. So to the person who's on Hopin, we have tried that. It almost killed us. We will keep iterating though, and I do think that there are ways in which we can make this more efficient. The thing that makes it all work much, much better and easier, the more people who volunteer, the more people who contribute, then every individual doesn't have to do so much. Like that part of actually being involved, it's not actually difficult, it just means kind of, having enough people. Last year it really helped that we had lots of people from KAIST, the Korean AI Institute. They were all over in every room kind of getting up, which helped because the computers are mostly in Korean, and they were Windows, so doubly hard to use. So that level of kind of support is really, really useful. So any of you, especially the folks, we have half of our community is PhD students who come every year. Being a volunteer, helping out in those ways is really, 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 really useful. So do consider that. That's one of the best ways to make the virtual experience go more smoothly.
Hi, thanks for the great organization. I wanted to ask what the next steps we can do to improve the inclusivity of the conference. One thing that struck me was, for example, the price of the hotel, which can be very difficult to be paid by people across the world. That's one thing. The other is I see that next year the conference will take place in Latin America. What are the steps so that the chairs and the people who volunteer are not, most of them, based in the US? Thanks.
I think one thing, so as sponsorship chair, raise a lot of money, right? Because it makes a huge difference having the ability. Like last year, we with Seoul, we were able to fund lots and lots of travel scholarships. It makes a big difference. So I think that that is where having the sponsorship money makes a huge difference. There's other stuff there too.
So one way in which we can do that is by expanding the number of scholarships and the financial support that we give. So one difference between the financial structure last year and the financial structure this year is that last year, because by coming into ACM, FAccT started off with $223,000. Right, there was that basis, and then we moved from there. We didn't have that this year, right? So there was a gap, and it's important to recognize this. There was a gap in how much financial support we could provide this year. And absolutely, you're right, that the United States is an extremely expensive context in which to hold a conference and to come and attend a conference. The hotel is part of that, but absolutely not the only thing. And one of the questions moving forward is how do we build out that financial support and find ways to use it to expand inclusivity.
Thanks a lot. If I may comment on this, providing grants is a way to mask structural inequalities, not solving them. So for example, many conferences that they are not even fairness focused, provide more than one venue for it. For example, hotels, so people who don't have the funding can stay. There are practical solutions that can be made to improve such things. That's why I also wanted to point out. Thank you.
All right, I wanted to emphasize or underline the need for, I think, full-time folks, especially with operating Zoom and Hopin. I think definitely having more, in other conferences, I've seen, full-time people with the conference, and I think that would definitely help take the load off of volunteers. But I also wanted to shout out, because we didn't shout out Regan Robertson, who has been running around behind the scenes a lot, so. Yeah, a lot of this couldn't have happened without Regan. I didn't see her on the slide, so I did want to shout her out.
That's a really good point on the full-time volunteer or the full-time role thing, and thinking about how we can compensate some roles within FACT is something that we are discussing. There are some organizational challenges around that because being affiliated with the ACM provides a huge amount of benefits. Like this whole event happened without our general chairs being liable for anything. But also ACM also has some structures that how to do some compensation so that that we can have some of those roles be handled in that way is something that we're talking about but don't have clear solutions for yet.
I think that all of the general chairs speak as one when we say this could not have happened without Regan. And you may have seen Regan sort of around, but the amount of savvy and the amount of skill and time and care that went into not just navigating us neophytes around the conferencing process, which is crazy and insane and deeply weird, but in solving problems that we had created for ourselves is just, it cannot be overstated. Her role is so important. And I also wanted to just shout out, he's not in the room, but Chad, who's been running AV for Absolute Productions, he can hear us, don't worry. It's the surveillance state. We know that there have been challenges, particularly on Monday and Tuesday, but the AV team has really, really stepped up and done a marvelous and professional job, and it's really important to recognize that they've been laboring really hard late into the night to make this conference possible.
Along the same line, I just want to thank Jake Stone, who cannot make here, but he has been immensely helpful in the entire conference organization process. I think he's a PhD student at Australian University, and he has been in his position as a project officer for 2 years. I'm really worried what we're going to do once he graduates or he no longer wants to do that position. But I just want, although he's not here in person, but hopefully Seth can deliver our, I guess, our thanks to him over in Australia.
Hi, this is actually on the similar topic. Stuart Geiger, UC San Diego. Please pay yourselves. I know it can seem like really awkward and weird if you're like in control of the budget to like compensate. Like if that's any potential concern, I just wanted to be a loud voice to say like, please do that. You deserve it. And like I've learned in other places, like some journals, they give their editors-in-chief, the journal gives the editor-in-chief a course release or things like this, and that kind of goes behind the scenes. It's maybe, but these things happen in other spaces. You deserve to have compensation for the work you do. And I just wanted to say, if you're feeling weird about that, don't.
So thank you for all the effort in organizing this. And I know asking for other things is kind of a bit much, but so as a first-time attendee, it was awesome coming here and meeting everyone, but it was a little bit difficult because there weren't any mechanisms to facilitate meeting new people that a lot of other conferences have. So I think that's one point in favor of poster sessions, is that you very organically meet people, but also a really easy thing we could do is have like a dedicated networking session. All we need is a room and tables, and that would be amazing. And I think it would really, because I had to rely on just DMing Twitter mutuals and saying, can we be friends? And that's not a scalable solution. So anything like that would be greatly appreciated next year.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to inquire, because one of the things we tried to facilitate with the break sessions and the coffee and having food is kind of informally doing that. So just wondering if that was felt or if that was anyone's experience. I saw a lot of people gathering, but I didn't know if folks were gathering with folks they already knew or gathering with new folks. But I do think that is a really great idea. Also keeping in mind not wanting to bombard the schedule of folks feeling like there's too much, I don't know. So just wondering if there are Other informal ways, again, plug for the survey. If you haven't started, perhaps that if you have ideas for informal ways to have more socialization and networking, please definitely let us know. Thank you for that.
Okay, so I guess while I'm standing here to respond to that,
Yeah.
yes, I think your point about how it can be tough to approach a group of people who it's, and then something I noticed a lot was when there's someone standing around looking, I'm like, are they looking for somebody or are they looking for anybody? Because if it's anybody, I'm happy to come up. But if it's somebody, I don't want to get in the way. Yeah, I think one other thing to plug then is other conference platforms like Whova, they have like a dedicated forum section where you can propose meetups. And that's a great way to organically meet people because you can say, okay, everyone interested in this topic, we're gonna go to a restaurant tonight. So things like that I think can also really help. So those are just some proposals for next time. Thank you. Once again, thank you.
Also thinking out loud, I know a number of other conferences have badges that let you know who's first time, who's presenting, who's a student. Sometimes the length of them can get a little annoying, but I do know that for people who are here at FAccT or any other conference for the first time, it might be nice that people can know who you are and approach and ask if you need anything or can help guide, so that might be an idea as well.
Does anyone in the audience have any views on whether poster sessions might facilitate that sort of thing? Does anyone want to talk about poster sessions? It was obviously a big kind of topic prior. If anyone wants to come up and offer any experiences from other conferences that they think might be relevant, then please do, but otherwise, next question.
And to my knowledge, I think the survey actually has a question for poster, your preference in poster, so please fill in the survey at the end of the previous session.
Can I ask a question that's not related to posters? Okay. So I had we had a craft session on the first day, which was responsible AI in India, and we had like 120 plus registrations. Almost everyone attended online because it's a visa issue and or cost issue, and it keeps coming up in all of these US-based conferences. But there's a massive appetite for those problems because the problems of responsible AI in India are very, very different from the kind of things that we do here. So I'm wondering if there is any scope for doing like satellite sessions, and the best work that comes out of it could be featured in the main conference, like sort of an India-based workshop or localized workshops in other countries who have visa issues and stuff.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing, because as you say, there's a lot of constraints associated to holding the conference in the US, is trying to move a lot more around the world. So that's why last year it was in Korea, the year before that it was virtual, before that it was in Barcelona. Next year we're aiming for Latin America. And there's often a tension because the way that the community is conformed right now has a lot of US participants, then there's a tension between the fact that the US is very expensive and it has a lot of visa constraints versus when it's outside the US, a lot of people need to travel internationally and there are also often visa constraints for those that are in a single entry visa. And so that's why we're trying to balance those two things, not saying that it's a perfect solution, but that's one of the things that we're doing. The other thing is in the community calls, that's not necessarily about papers, but it's about creating a space for the community to engage, for us to continue the dialogue that started here and keep it going so that we don't pause talking for a year or two. And I don't think there's right now any plans for something like a satellite event per se, but it's definitely something that we can think about, or in particular, maybe if someone wants to self-organize something like a watch party or something like that, which I know at NeurIPS workshops, for instance, it has happened, maybe that could be a solution. Thank you for your recommendation.
Thank you.
We are formally at the end of our time, but perhaps there's one person who's waiting patiently to ask questions, so maybe.
Just very brief, it would be great if there could be a social event, voluntary, just, in everybody pay their own, just name a bar and people meet up. That would have been nice. But thank you so much for a great conference.
So thank you everybody for coming, and have a safe flight home, or happy rest of your time in Chicago if you're staying here a bit, and we will hopefully see you all in Latin America.